The unsurpassed, penetrating, perfect truth is seldom met with, even in the 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today we're going to talk about Great Master Dogen's chapter Shoji, Life and Death. That's how it's often translated. That's how Reverend Master Jiyu translated it. It's the shortest chapter in the Shobogenzo, and it's one of the very last. It's not dated, but it could have been written towards the end of Great Master Dogen's life, so it would have an immediacy for him. But a number of the themes are echoed in some of the things we've already been talking about. They all kind of hang together. And in some ways this chapter is hard to understand, and in some ways it's really simple, and you can't really understand it intellectually. It can help a bit, but really you have to just approach it from the heart in a way. As I said, Shoji can be translated as life and death, birth and death, living and dying, and also samsara. Apparently Shoji also means samsara, the world of birth and death. And it's helpful to know that because Dogen uses this term in different ways, it seems, in his writings. As he often does, he'll go from one meaning to another, and we won't know, but here we go. He says, there are no life and death when the Buddha is within them. When there is no Buddha within life and death, we are not deluded by them. Well, what does this mean? It sounds sort of contradictory at first reading. There's no life and death and the Buddha's there. When there's no Buddha within life and death, we're not deluded. I looked at Reverend Master Hubert's translation for help, and it sheds a bit of light on it. At least this is his take on the matter. He says, because there is Buddha within living and dying, life and death do not exist. And he explains this by saying, living and dying means the flow of conditions, the flow of impermanence. Life and death refers to a more static thing. There's life and there's death. But living and dying is more of a flowing thing. And because Buddha nature permeates the whole of our experience, living and dying is just part of that, And the way we tend to think of living and dying, it isn't quite the way we think of it, so it doesn't really exist in the way we think. That's, and we're born, we live, and we pass away, but things don't exist in quite the way we think of them. And the next part, when there's no Buddha within life and death, we're not deluded by them. Again, Rev. Master Hubert says, he translated as, because the Buddha did not exist within life and death, he was not infatuated with living and dying. That was his understanding, and I find it kind of helpful. Other people translate it or understand it in different ways, but this is something at least you can get a bit of a grasp on, because actually it helps with the whole chapter. The Buddha went beyond concerns of life and death. He didn't worry about life and death, about living and dying. He lived and he died as a human being. He didn't resist that. He accepted them, even as a young person, as we know, when he saw an old person, a sick person, a dead person, and a monk, a renunciate. It got his attention. Everybody dies. I will die. And this was the spur that set him to find the truth, as we know. So his question, why is there old age and death? Why do people have to suffer like this? That was his question. And the answer is, everything that's born has to die. We're born, we live, we die. There's no way around it. And it's acceptance of that frees us from the suffering, the clinging to life and the fear of death. It's accepting that helps us. Dogen goes on. Should someone seek the Buddha outside of life and death, he is as one who turns his cart to the north while trying to go south. And by doing this, we just create more problems for ourselves. We're going in the wrong direction, trying to go one way, and actually the way is over there, You can't get away from life and death. This is what it comes down to. You can't escape from them. As Dogen says, life and death are of themselves nothing more than nirvana. Life and death, as I said, also means samsara. Samsara and nirvana are not separate places. You don't get away from samsara, world of birth and death, to get to this nice safe place called nirvana. It's not like that. Those who know nirvana say that it's found within this very world of birth and death, living and dying, right within this very world. It's not somewhere else. And that's why training and enlightenment are one thing. We actualize, we put our enlightenment into practice by doing the training. We're not trying to get something from somewhere else. It's all right here. We're not trying to escape from something and get to something different. I want something else. It's right here. Living and dying, training and enlightenment, it's all together. We have everything we need right here. And Dogen says, there is obviously no need to either to try to escape from life and death or to search for nirvana. And for the first time, freedom from life and death becomes possible. Not because we're getting away from them. We simply accept that life and death are inevitable. And we free ourselves from our attachment to them. That's part of what our training is. To not cling on to ourself, our life, our little me, and to be afraid of losing it and dying. We don't have to cling on to life. We don't have to be afraid of death. He says, do not make the mistake of believing that a change takes place between life and death. Life is simply one position in time, and death is simply one position in time, because neither life nor death exists in the way we think. He says, when called life, there is only life. When called death, there is only death. If life comes, it is life. If death comes, it is death. You don't have to worry about them. This is so important that Reverend Master Ji put it in her book, How to Grow a Lotus Blossom, when she almost died and she knew this truth for herself. And it's also on her stupa. I'll come back to that. So it's important, when there's life, there's only life. When there's death, there's only death. You don't get away from one to get to the other. You don't get away from both to get to some other place. This very moment is all we have, When there's life, there's life. When there's death, there's death. It's like the firewood thing. The firewood and the ashes. When there's firewood, there's firewood. It's not ashes yet. When there's ashes, there's ashes. It's no longer firewood. In a sense, separated, because there's just this moment. Like when the piece of burning wood, just this piece of burning wood. It was firewood before, it will be ashes. Now it's just a piece of burning wood. And it is neither firewood nor ashes. It's just this moment. It's kind of subtle, but this is what he's trying to point to. Rebirth. In this chapter, Dogen doesn't say anything about rebirth. He leaves it alone. Some of you asked about this, and I said I would talk about it. So here we are, because in this chapter, he's simply talking about life and death as we experience them. Well, scholars argue about whether Dogen believed in rebirth or not. Some people say he did, some people say he didn't. In some places he seems to take it for granted. He tells these stories of people's past lives and so on. So I think he probably did, but what do I know? But mostly his focus is in what we do right now. How do we train in this very moment? Whether it's life, whether it's death, whatever it might be, how do we train right now? We don't have to be constantly thinking about what's going to happen, what did happen. And yet they do come to us, of course. We know that one day we will die. We don't pretend it's not going to happen. And yet, right now, here we are, living, breathing, So, rebirth. Somewhat unfashionable in Western Buddhism, it would seem. People are always trying to explain it away. Cultural baggage from Asia. No reason for birth, thinking of, rebirth, silly idea. Well, the Buddha believed in it. The Pali Canon's full of stories about his past lives and stuff, like the story of one day he had a bad headache. And he told his disciples, this is because in a previous life he had been a boy that killed a fish by banging his head on a rock. And now he had this headache, so he accepted it. This is why I have this. this Pali Canon is full of stories like that. So, you know. And in our own day, I know a good many people, very grounded, sensible people, who have experienced past lives, things from previous times. And as we know, there's all kinds of stories about people who have experiences as fighter pilots in World War II and things like this. And it's hard to explain them away other than in terms of rebirth. So I wonder why people keep having a problem with it. It's not just imagination, not just dreams. I think it makes sense to me, explains a lot. But you don't have to believe it, just because I do. Just don't disbelieve it. You never know. We don't see all there is. We don't know everything, We can't know everything. Who knows? So if there's rebirth, what is it that is reborn? This is a tricky thing. If there's no self, there's no, undying me, what is it that goes from one life to the next? It seems like a contradiction. Because the body is gone, our little changeable mind is gone as well. We talked about this recently. Well, it's not the body, and it's not our little mind. Buddhism teaches that it is consciousness and karma that are reborn. Interesting. And this is not the same as a self or a mind. Consciousness and karma. Reverend Master Ji used to talk about this, and she used various analogies. The lava lamp. She had she had several lava lamps. In the 1970s, these were quite popular, and you may remember if you were that ancient. The lava lamp is a big glass container full of water, and a bulb at the bottom. And in the water, the bottom of the water, there is this gloop, which is heavier than the water, and is a different color. Like she had a red one. And you turn the lamp on at the bottom, it warms up the gloop, and the gloop gradually rises through the water as it heats up in globs and blobs, rises up to the top of the water, and then as it cools, it comes back down into the bottom. And she says, this is rebirth. We are born, we get our karma, we are born, a little glob, depending on our circumstances and our karma, and the consciousness, whatever that may be. But it's not an individual self. But this consciousness and karma takes form in matter, rises as a visible gloop. We're all visible gloops here. And then as it cools and dies, then it sinks back down into the base. Lovely analogy. This, I'd sit and look at this thing for hours. But it was just so helpful. So she had several of these things. I thought it was great. So because of the karma we inherit, we take various kinds of forms in various kinds of circumstances. Well, it's not a me, as I said, that's born from life to life. It's not a little personal me gloop. It's just a gloop of stuff. Because of karmic memories people may have. Well, how do we get these karmic memories? And again, Reverend Master Jiu had a lovely down-to-earth analogy. So she says it's like going through a cafeteria. You got your plate and your tray, and you get a dollop of spuds and a glop of vegetables and a clump of something else and gravy, all your greed, anger and delusion on your plate, and there you go, and here you come into this life with this plate full of stuff, and you make the best of it. Which isn't a self, you just pick up this stuff. And again, I find that a really helpful analogy, because it's not a judgment here. So some people who inherit very difficult karma, have a really hard time in this life, it's not a judgment. It's not because they're bad people. It's because they've inherited this difficult karma. They picked up a bigger dollop of spuds than somebody else might have. And Reverend Master used to say that sometimes people who inherit very difficult karma, it's like a bodhisattva act to take on that difficult stuff. People who are born with mental illness or some kind of really, really hard things, physical disabilities and so on, have taken on this very difficult karma. And that's a courageous and noble act. They may not have intended that, but that's what they've got. So you can't judge a person because of what they're like or what they have. Just they've taken on this plate full of stuff, and they're making the best of it. And they still have, we still have choices and make choices about what we do with our plate full of spuds and vegetables and so on. we can perpetuate it, continue to indulge whatever tendencies we may have of greed, anger and delusion, or we can work with them. We can do our best to help them. It's up to us. Nobody is beyond help or helping oneself. It's up to us what we do. Just do our very best with it, turn it around, Well, my favorite analogy for rebirth, which I like these ones, but another nice one is Great Master Kazan. This image of waves in the ocean. I love this, because I can understand this. We're like waves on the ocean, blown by the wind of karma that creates waves, and you see this wave traveling through the ocean. But it's just part of the ocean. It's not a separate thing at all. And in fact, the water, constantly changes. It's not the same water going through a little separate thing. The waves, the wind of karma, or the wind of circumstance, creates those waves. Whatever we pick up, we're a wave. And yet we're just part of the ocean. And then finally we fall back into the sea. I think that's really helpful, because it's not separate in any way at all. But you can see it. You see this wave, And it looks like an individual thing, and yet it's just part of the sea. It's nothing different, nothing special. Again, a really helpful analogy, I think, for thinking about rebirth, about life and death, particularly. Because that's why we don't have to be afraid of birth and death. We're just like a wave. We arise, we abide, we change, we fall back down into the ocean. Just like that. Dewdrop falling into the shining sea, as it were. All these different analogies you get throughout the Buddhist writings. Really helpful. Reverend Master Jiva Stupa. This is what's written on it. One of the sides has written this. If life comes, there is only life. If death comes, there is only death. All acceptance is the key that unlocks the gateless gate. Within this place there is no suffering, no coming, no going, no ceasing, no way. There is only endless training, appearing here, disappearing there, going in and out, always becoming Buddha. This is exactly what Dogen is saying. So Dogen goes on. There is no reason whatsoever for a being to be controlled by either life or death, and hope should not be put within them. We're not trying to get away from life or get away from death. We're not trying to cling on to either of them. Don't put hope in either of them. We just live, we're born, we live, we die. That's it. Very simple. And all we have to do is accept that we're born, we live, and we die. Simple, but not always easy, To say, well, this is just how things are, we don't have to be afraid of them. When someone is getting close to death, they're often afraid. Maybe sometimes very afraid, maybe just a little afraid. People who've been training for many years sometimes are quite afraid. Some people who seem to be completely, not having practiced in any way, religion at all, can be just fine. Something in them knows it's just fine. We just don't know, and you can't make a judgment about people having fear or not fear or whatever. I know one Zen master who was a great help to many, many people, who was afraid when he was dying. So it's not for us to judge, But the more we can be still and trust in what we've just been saying, trust in the teaching that, we're all just part of Buddha nature. We're not separate. Everything doesn't just end with us. The more still and the less fearful you're likely to be when our time comes. It's just fine. We arise, we abide, we change, we pass away, like everything else. This very life and death is the Buddha's own life. That's got capitals. Buddha's own life. And should you try to escape from them, you will lose the life of Buddha in escaping therefrom. If you neither refuse nor search for this life, you will enter immediately into the Buddha mind. We are part of the life of Buddha right now. We're not trying to get away from life with this little L, but we're part of the life of Buddha with big L. Right now we're part of that. As we sit and breathe, we are part of that. And Dogen goes on, do not, under any circumstances, try to understand this intellectually or give it expression in words. If you allow your concern for and attachment to the body and mind to fall away naturally, you will precipitate yourself into the realm of Buddha. And as I said, it sounds so simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy, We can think, I'm not attached to my body and mind. What about my morning tea? What about lunch? What about getting injured or sick? Or never mind, what about dying, Can I let go of my body and mind? Can I really let them go? Well, we're going to have to eventually. And the more I can relinquish my clinging now and work on my fearfulness and my grasping now, the more I'll have practice at that when my time comes. And even now, of course, as we know, the more we cling, the more we suffer. Even in this very moment, the more we cling, the more we suffer. So we're not just getting ready to die, we're also living our life, getting ready to live, living our life this very moment. It's the same thing, just relinquishing that grip on I have to have this, or I have to keep this, or it has to be like this right now. But relinquish that grip and allow everything to come our way and go, We don't get rid of those concerns about breakfast. Of course, we have to live, we have to eat, we have to live our life. But we don't have to grasp on quite so tightly, just to trust that all is well. Try not to feed our anxiety, fear, worry, gripping onto things. Sitting still, There's a well-known piece. When the Buddha does all, and you follow this doing effortlessly, and without worrying about it, you gain freedom from suffering and become yourself Buddha. I love that. When the Buddha does all, when we just listen to our true heart and do what needs to be done, when we follow this doing effortlessly without getting obstructed by fear and resistance and I don't want to do it and I want something else, just following the doing effortlessly, putting down all that selfish desire of I want this and I don't like that, without resistance or fear, without worrying about it, effortlessly and without worrying about it, we gain freedom from suffering. We know this. The more we let go of our clinging to things, let go of our anxiety about everything, the more we gain freedom from suffering. It's just easier to accept things. All acceptance is the key that unlocks the gateless gate, and become Buddha, manifesting our Buddha nature, our true life. Suffering is non-acceptance, wanting something else. Acceptance is the key that helps us to relinquish our attachment to life, to death, our fear, whatever, Just living from wisdom, our true nature. When the Buddha does all and we follow this doing effortlessly and without worrying about it, living from our true heart as best we can, as the Buddha would live, And the Dogen continues, since the above is so, what is there to hinder you within your own mind? Any hindrance? Well, all our desires and I want something else, and resistance and crabbiness and what does it have to be this way? It's all something we've put there in our own mind and we can let it go. Even though it may not be easy, at least it's simple. We know what we need to do. Any hindrance is just put there, what is there to hinder you within your own mind? The way to Buddhahood is easy. This is great. It's so simple and straightforward. It sounds really easy. And it is easy, because again, except for our own selfish opinions, our desires, our I want something else, and all that. We constantly have to work with them. The way to Buddhahood is easy. They who do not perpetrate evil, they who do not try to grasp at life and death, but work for the good of all living things with utter compassion, giving respect to those older and loving understanding to those younger than themselves. They who do not reject, search for, think on, or worry about anything, have the name of Buddha. You must look for nothing more. These are all simple things that we can aspire to and that we can understand. There's nothing esoteric or completely impossible here. May not be easy, but we can understand. I will read it again. The way to Buddhahood is easy. They who do not perpetrate evil. They who do not try to grasp at life and death, but work for the good of all living things with utter compassion, giving respect to those older and loving understanding to those younger than themselves. They who do not reject, search for, think on, or worry about anything, have the name of Buddha. You must look for nothing more. It's wonderful. Well, this is the last of our talks for this retreat, and they all hang together. Dogen's constant themes that come up through all of them, and through all his writings actually. I wrote a few of them down. Buddha nature pervades everything, and we're all part of it. He says this over and over again through the chapters we just read, throughout all his writings. Buddha nature is part of, pervades everything. We're all part of it. People, animals, things, bricks, tiles and stones, as he says, just inanimate things, animate things, mountains, rivers, everything. He says this over and over again. We are all part of Buddha nature, nothing separate in any way. All our thoughts, all our experiences, everything's part of it. The importance of faith and compassion, deep faith, constantly practicing faith, compassion, utter compassion, working for the good of all living things with utter compassion, just as he said before. Constantly the emphasis on compassion and faith in the practice, rather than erudition and scholarship. That's not much help. But faith, compassion, we can practice these things. Training and enlightenment are one thing we keep talking about this all this week. Training and enlightenment are one. They're inseparable. As we practice our training, we practice our enlightenment at the same time. We cannot separate them. We're not trying to get something called enlightenment. We're practicing our enlightenment. We're not trying to gain something. Impermanence, not to cling to anything. Our views and opinions, our ideas about enlightenment and delusion, our body, our mind, life, death, our self, our wonderful, precious self, not to cling to any of these things, but to see through it all is all just part of that life of Buddha. Nothing to cling on to. The importance of meditation and doing the practice right now. The sitting meditation that he constantly comes back to and talks about. His very first writing, Rules of Meditation. The second thing, why you need to do it. Constantly he comes back to the importance of simple meditation, whether we're sitting in formal meditation or just living our life, coming back to that over and over and over again. Doing the practice right now, in this very moment, not getting all caught up in what might happen or ideas about everything. Just doing the practice. And above all, that we can do it. We can all do it. It's for us. Always is encouraging, always is says, we're all part of Buddha nature. We all have it right here, right now. We don't have to go somewhere else. It's right here. It's for us. That's his teaching for us. And all these themes recur throughout his work. So if you feel a little bit intimidated by Dogen, if you choose to take him on, you might consider that these themes recur constantly and they're all simple. So when we have passages that are completely, seemingly unfathomable, we can just bear in mind. He's telling us about Buddha nature, impermanence, training and enlightenment are one, and we can all do it. And most of all, they will just help us in our life and our practice. All these themes constantly helping us in our life, in our daily practice. And that's been his intention all along.